My name is Eleanor Brooks, and the last thing I ever expected was my own daughter giving me an ultimatum that would change everything. Mom, Jessica said, her voice cold and steady. It's simple. Either you start serving my husband, Michael, the way a mother-in-law should, or you leave this house. Your choice. I froze for a moment, the words echoing in my mind. The house I had lived in for decades suddenly felt like a trap. Every memory, the birthday parties, the laughter, the quiet nights reading together, seemed to vanish in an instant. But instead of anger, a slow, calm smile spread across my face. I walked to the corner of the room where my suitcase waited. As I zipped it open, I carefully packed a few essentials: clothes, my favorite book, and a journal I hadn't touched in years. Each item felt like a small piece of my freedom. Jessica, I said softly, I guess we both have our choices, don't we? I picked up the suitcase, straightened my shoulders, and walked out the door without another word. If you love stories full of family drama, shocking twists, and revenge, subscribe to the Reddit Hour and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Driving away, I thought about the little girl who once held my hand tightly when she was scared. How had she become someone so cold, so demanding? This wasn't just about a house or a husband. It was about control, entitlement, and underestimating me. And I had a plan that Jessica would never see coming. That night, in a small motel far from home, I opened my journal and began writing. Each word was a step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, and a quiet, calculated revenge. Jessica had given me an ultimatum, but the truth was, she had no idea the storm she had just unleashed. Little did she know, the real power was in my hands now. And patience, they say, makes revenge all the more satisfying. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the motel window, but instead of feeling warmth, it highlighted the weight of what I had done. I had left the house, my daughter, and the life I had built. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt alive. Free. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the edge of the bed, thinking. Jessica had made her move, thinking she controlled me, thinking her ultimatum would crush me. But she didn't realize that I had lived long enough to know patience can be more powerful than fury, and silence often louder than a scream. I called a few old friends, people who had quietly drifted away over the years, and set up meetings. Rebuilding connections, I realized, was the first step to rebuilding myself. I started small, a walk around the city, a few errands, just immersing myself in the world beyond my daughter's shadow. While doing this, I began to quietly research the house, my finances, and what rights I had. Every article I read, every legal loophole I discovered, was a piece of a larger puzzle forming in my mind. Jessica had assumed I was powerless. She had assumed I would bend. She had assumed wrong. That night, sitting in the dim motel light, I opened my journal. I began to map out my plan, not recklessly, not in anger, but methodically. The first step was to regain control of my own life. The second step was to let Jessica slowly realize that power is not always in the hands of the one who shouts the loudest. As I wrote, I smiled quietly to myself. I could feel it, the tide turning slowly but surely. She thought she was the one setting the rules. But the truth was, she had only started a chain of events that would leave her world shaken in ways she never imagined. I closed my journal, letting the quiet hum of the city outside fill the room. The storm had begun, and this time, I was in the driver's seat. The following week, I settled into a small apartment I had rented not far from the city. It was modest, quiet, and anonymous, the perfect place to plan, observe, and regroup. I spent my mornings walking the neighborhood, my afternoons researching, and my evenings journaling every thought, every idea that could help me reclaim what Jessica thought she had taken. I began by reconnecting with old friends and neighbors who had known me when Jessica was a child. Each conversation, casual as it seemed, gave me insight into the subtle ways I could influence events. No one suspected the calm, composed woman in the coffee shop who smiled politely was quietly orchestrating a plan that would leave a family reeling. Then came the first opportunity. Jessica had always prided herself on being meticulous about appearances. She loved to showcase the perfect life, Michael by her side, social gatherings, a home she believed she controlled. So I started leaving small, anonymous gestures that would make her question her control. A few letters, a few carefully timed visits to people she trusted. Nothing traceable, nothing obvious. Just the quiet, unsettling feeling that someone was quietly observing. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything. Her arrogance, her assumptions, the way she treated others, and her careless mistakes. Each note, each memory was another piece in the puzzle. By the time she realized it, it would be too late. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about teaching her a lesson in humility. I wanted her to understand that power taken for granted can vanish in an instant. That strength doesn't always shout. It sometimes whispers, waits, and then strikes when least expected. As I sat at my desk late one night, the city lights flickering through the window, I couldn't help but smile. Jessica believed she had written the ending to our story. She thought she had won. But in the quiet, unseen moments, the real story was being written, and it was mine. Little did she know, the next time our paths crossed, nothing would ever feel the same. Weeks passed, and I began to see the subtle effects of my quiet strategy. Jessica's carefully curated life, once seamless and perfect in her mind, started showing cracks. She would glance at her phone a little too often, frown at unexpected messages, and mutter under her breath about things she couldn't control. Each reaction was a small victory, invisible to anyone but me. One evening, I decided it was time to make a more deliberate move. Michael, her husband, was away on a business trip, leaving Jessica alone in the house she believed she commanded. I called a few of my old friends who were still connected to our neighborhood, subtly letting them know I would be reaching out to a few people for advice and guidance. Their familiarity with Jessica's household gave me insight into timing, her habits, and weak points. That night, I sent an anonymous note to Jessica. Nothing threatening, just a gentle reminder that appearances aren't always reality. It was carefully worded, designed to plant doubt, and timed perfectly to arrive after she had hosted one of her meticulously organized gatherings. The effect was immediate. Her perfect hosting demeanor faltered just slightly, a wrinkle in the otherwise flawless mask. She texted Michael repeatedly, expressing frustration, and even her closest friends noticed the tension. I watched from a distance, savoring the moment. Patience was paying off. But it wasn't enough. I wanted more than doubt. I wanted her to truly understand that she could not control me or dictate my life. I began leaving subtle clues about my knowledge of her little manipulations, small but pointed reminders that someone was quietly observing, someone who understood the truth behind her perfect facade. Each night, I documented her reactions, noting her growing unease. Every note, every observation, every calculated step built toward the ultimate revelation. The moment when she would finally see that the woman she had tried to crush was stronger, smarter, and far more in control than she could ever imagine. And the best part? Jessica had no idea it was me orchestrating everything. She believed the unrest was coincidence, that perhaps she was overthinking. She didn't see the storm approaching, the storm I had patiently been preparing for. By the time a month had passed, Jessica's confidence had begun to falter. The subtle disruptions I had orchestrated were working. She questioned herself constantly, second-guessed her decisions, and for the first time, the flawless control she prided herself on was slipping. I knew it was time to take a more direct step. I reached out to an old family lawyer, discreetly inquiring about the legal rights I still held over the house and assets that Jessica assumed were beyond my reach. Every detail I gathered was another piece in my growing plan. One evening, I visited a cafe near my apartment and casually met someone who had once worked closely with Michael. Our conversation was innocent on the surface, but carefully I learned about his habits, his weaknesses, and the things he overlooked at home. Little by little, I began assembling the pieces that would allow me to expose the cracks in Jessica's carefully constructed world. Back at my apartment, I spread out notes, timelines, and observations. Everything pointed to one inevitable conclusion. Jessica had underestimated me. She believed her ultimatum had broken me, but in truth, it had awakened a patience and cunning she had never imagined in her own mother. Then came the night that changed everything. Jessica sent me a text, furious and demanding, questioning why I hadn't responded to her calls. I didn't answer. Instead, I calmly sent her a small, anonymous message. Not everything is as it seems. Some truths reveal themselves only when the time is right. Within hours, subtle rumors began circulating through her social circle, small incidents that made her friends question the life she presented. She tried to cover, to control, but the cracks were already visible, and panic started to seep into her actions. I watched silently from a distance, my heart steady. This was only the beginning of her realization. The daughter who once thought she held all the power was about to discover that the real control had always been mine. Quietly, patiently, and brilliantly. And the twist she never saw coming? She believed she had driven me away for good. But every move I had made since leaving the house had been in preparation for the moment I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, and show her that underestimating a mother comes with consequences. The day finally came when I knew Jessica would feel the full weight of her actions. She had been careless, overconfident, and blinded by her own arrogance. I arranged a casual visit to her house under the guise of returning some old belongings she had demanded I take. She didn't suspect a thing. When I walked through the door, she greeted me with a mixture of irritation and forced politeness. "Finally," she said, her voice sharp. "I thought you'd forgotten." I smiled gently, calmly. "I never forget anything, Jessica," I replied. My words seemed harmless, but they carried the weight of every patient plan I had executed over the last several weeks. I asked to sit in the living room, and she hesitated before stepping aside. Then, I began casually discussing the house, the neighbors, Michael's routines, and other small details. She listened, eyes narrowing, unaware that each piece of information I shared had been carefully curated to reveal her mistakes and oversights. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out a folder, carefully prepared with documentation, timelines, and proof of the subtle manipulations she and Michael had attempted, believing I was powerless. Jessica's eyes widened as she realized that everything she had done in the last month, the arguments, the ultimatums, the attempts to control me, had been quietly recorded and analyzed. "Mom," she whispered, a flicker of fear in her voice. I leaned in, my expression calm but firm. "You thought sending me away would make me disappear. You thought your husband and your little games would control me. But you underestimated me. And that, Jessica, is your mistake." Her lips trembled. Michael entered unexpectedly, curious about the tension. I looked at him, then back at Jessica, and said quietly, "Some truths reveal themselves only when the time is right." For the first time, Jessica realized that the woman she had tried to dismiss, control, and belittle had not only survived, but had quietly taken control. Every move she made since the ultimatum had been anticipated, and every consequence she faced now was the result of her own choices. I stood, took my belongings, and smiled once more. "I'm leaving, Jessica. But remember this, power is never given. It's earned. And underestimating someone you should respect always comes with a price." As I walked out the door, the house that once felt like her kingdom now felt different. The daughter who thought she had all the control had finally seen the truth. And for the first time, I felt complete, not just as a mother, but as a woman who refused to be controlled, silenced, or disrespected. The twist wasn't in anger or confrontation. It was in patience, strategy, and quiet strength. And Jessica would never forget the lesson I had taught her. After that day, life changed, not just for Jessica, but for me. The tension that had once ruled our household dissipated, replaced by a quiet respect, though unspoken, that lingered in the air. She never issued another ultimatum, never demanded obedience. The power she had tried to wield so arrogantly had quietly shifted, and she knew it. I returned to my small apartment, not with bitterness, but with peace. I had regained control of my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. The house, the arguments, the ultimatums, they no longer defined me. I had learned something far more valuable. Strength is not about confrontation or fury, but about patience, strategy, and knowing your own worth. Over the next few weeks, I reconnected with friends, pursued old hobbies, and even explored opportunities one had abandoned long ago. Each day, I felt lighter, freer, and more alive. Jessica's absence of control over me was a lesson she would never forget, but it was also my own quiet victory. Then one evening, I received a message from Michael. Unexpectedly polite, even cautious. It was clear he had begun to notice the changes in Jessica as well, and while I didn't seek revenge against him, I realized that sometimes the ripple effect of patience and intelligence can reach further than you expect. I smiled as I locked my apartment door that night. The ultimatum that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become a turning point. I had walked away, planned carefully, and reclaimed my power without anger, without recklessness, but with the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your own strength. Jessica would remember the lesson for the rest of her life. And as for me, I finally understood that true freedom comes not from avoiding challenges, but from meeting them with patience, clarity, and an unshakable sense of self. The twist had never been in leaving. It had always been in the way I returned, stronger, wiser, and untouchable. And in that quiet victory, I discovered something far more important than control or power. I had discovered myself.